It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you.
Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Michael Hauge, an author, a story expert who has consulted with the leading screenwriters, producers, directors, and stars in Hollywood about their screenplays and their stories that they're telling. And he's the author of a great book, the best-selling book, Selling Your Story in 60 Seconds, the guaranteed way to get your screenplay or novel read. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too, because, we talked about this a little bit before the show started. Storytelling is sort of really becoming an important currency in business in general, just not in Hollywood. But, there's no place better in the world than Hollywood in knowing how to tell a story effectively to get people to take some action.
Yeah, I think so. Hollywood has certainly proven itself to be the most commercially successful source of storytelling around the world. And they've really sort of codified, or they know kind of the key elements that need to go into a story so it'll be emotionally involving and lucrative at the same time.
All right. Well, before we jump into the meat, take a minute to introduce yourself, because my introduction is inadequate for everything that you've done in your life. But, tell us about your background.
Well, basically, some decades ago, I sort of rode into Hollywood on the turnip truck, wanting only to work in the movie industry, but because I'd loved movies since I was like 5 years old and saw my first one, and having no idea what I was going to do. But after arriving and going to a film school here, this sort of small independent film school, I learned to be what is known as a reader, which is someone who is hired by agents and producers to read screenplays for them. Screenplays submitted oftentimes by people who want to get their scripts sold or want representation by the agent and so on. And mostly these scripts are absolutely terrible. And so that the agent or producer, whoever would hire me, doesn't want to be bothered. So my job was to synopsize the script. So they only had to read one page of synopsis rather than 120 pages. And then I would make a recommendation, which was oftentimes, forget about this isn't worth pursuing. But out of that job, that turned into a job with a producer. I eventually became his head of development, as it's known, which means I was now working with other writers and I was finding or developing stories that he could turn into movies, either movies on television or feature films. And that led to some other jobs. And so I was on this track of dealing with story within the industry. But out of that grew a few things. One, I started teaching screenwriting from the point of view of someone who's on the other side of the table at UCLA Extension. And out of that grew a seminar I created a 2-day seminar that I took first around the country to different cities and then started going around the world with that. And then out of that, people would say to me, well, would you be willing to look at my screenplay and give me some tips? So I became what's known as a script consultant, which is my main activity now. And along the way, I wrote a couple books, the one you mentioned, and also prior to that, a book called Writing Screenplays That Sell. And that's just was published in its 20th anniversary edition, and that's been around quite a while. So now I am a combination of several things. I write about story and script, I consult, and I lecture. But more recently, I have branched out because people who came to hear me, some of them were not in the Hollywood arena. They were novelists or sometimes business people, and I started getting invited to speak to either corporate groups or a lot of public speaking groups or whoever it might be, showing them how to take the principles of story that I knew from Hollywood and apply them to their speeches or to their sales situations or to speaking with employees and trying to inspire them, or just about any situation where a story would be called for. And so now I've kind of branched out beyond Hollywood and also to these other arenas, but always about how do you connect with people with the use of story.
Okay. So can you tell us the name of like the most famous script you've consulted on that got turned into a movie?
Well, I've done a number that became well known because a few years ago I was contacted by Will Smith's company, and he had read my book and watched a video I had done, so he wanted me to give him some input on I Am Legend. And he just wanted me to take a look at the script and give him some ideas, and I had never met him before, but I got acquainted with him then. Eventually, that led to me consulting on some other projects that his company did or he did. Probably the one I don't know if it's the most famous, because there were several that he did that I had input on, but the one I was probably most involved with of those was The Karate Kid, the remake of The Karate Kid with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. So I was involved with that. And then there have been other projects for other movie stars that I was involved with, occasionally directly with them, but oftentimes with the production company who was packaging it with those stars. So I'll go with Karate Kid, or most recently Concussion, which
yes.
Will Smith did, and I gave a little input on that script at some point where it was being developed, and loved the movie, by the way. In that case, yes. I thought the script was terrific, and I was pretty disappointed that it didn't get nominated for some things, including him at Oscar time. But that's the most recent widely distributed film that I've had any involvement in.
All right. Well, I want to get back to selling your story in 60 seconds. I love the title of the book, because to me that really sort of encapsulates the challenge for so many people in the business world today, especially salespeople, is they're talking to customers who are busy and distracted. Lots of competitors that are sending tons of what I call undifferentiated messaging through to the customer's inbox. And it's like, how do you quickly capture the attention of the buyer? Because you're not, at this point, much like in your book, you're not trying to, in 60 seconds, you're not trying to sell the screenplay. You're trying to get somebody to take an action, which is to engage with it, read it, take it to that next level, perhaps. And similar with sales, you're trying to get somebody's attention to engage in a conversation about the product or service you're selling. So that 60 seconds to me I think is a really crucial time, because first impressions are so important.
Absolutely. Well, not just because it's a first impression, but also because, generally speaking, if it's someone that can lead to a sale, you're probably talking to someone who's in a position to have very little time to spend with you, just because they've got a phone list of 100 people, or they've got, a staff of 100 employees, or 100 other things to deal with, just like an agent in Hollywood or an executive in Hollywood. So you don't really have the luxury of sitting down and weaving a long, meandering tale or any other series of comments that's going to consume a lot of their time. Like you say, the goal, it seems in that situation, just like with a screenwriter pitching a script, is just to stimulate enough interest that they want to take the next action. And that it might be to invite you in for a meeting, or it might be to hear more about the product or the service or the consulting service you're offering, or something like that. But it's about it's partly about capturing their attention, but I think equally important to that, it's not just a question of attention time or attention span. It's about somehow in a very short period of time conveying the essence of what it is you're offering them.
Engaging their emotions.
Well, absolutely. And that's where stories come in oftentimes, because the whole reason stories are so strong and such a effective tool in a number of selling situations is because the primary goal of a story, and the thing it's most powerful at, is eliciting emotion in the listener. And you can have all the convincing data in the world, but it very rarely is that going to be emotionally involving. But a story where the listener is psychologically becoming the character and experiencing the actions of the story through that character, that means they are in it. They are emotionally involved, and that emotion is going to translate into actions much more readily than facts are, if you will.
So describe for us, if you can, this pitch meeting, if you will, in Hollywood, the sort of the setting for where the 60 seconds take place. Because I think it's probably not too dissimilar from the situation a lot of salespeople find themselves in. So
yeah. And one thing you said, you described it as a pitch meeting, but one thing to understand is rarely is it a meeting. That's why the book is Selling Your Story in 60 Seconds.
Because you have 60 seconds, right?
Well, if you're far enough along that you're having a meeting, and I would guess that this is not dissimilar than a salesperson situation, if you should get to a point where you're invited into someone's office and sit down and have a cup of coffee, you got some time to play with, or they already want a relationship with you, or they already know you. But in Hollywood and in most earlier in the process, those situations, it's not a meeting at all. It is either a phone call or a kind of there's a thing in Hollywood that's become popular in the last decade or so called a pitch fest,
right,
or some variation on that. And it's like speed dating. If you've seen the movie Hitch or any other thing that shows speed dating, basically it's a screenwriter will pay money to be there, and then they can go sit in front of an agent or a producer or someone who has a job like I used to have, where they're working for a producer, and you've got usually 5 minutes to convince them that they want to read your script. So even that, I suppose you could call it a meeting, but it's a very, very forced, abbreviated meeting where you got to really be condensed and succinct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was using the term meeting loosely in that case, but yeah, it's that first contact.
Yeah, distinction, or it's on the telephone, or sometimes it might be in a hallway or on an elevator. I mean, if you're going to, say, a writer's conference, or if any kind of conference, if you're a salesperson and you heard a speaker that you think might be a potential customer or client, you might spot them in line for the buffet or, in the lobby and have a moment, and you'll say hello and you're introducing yourself. And I don't even think, you certainly don't have 5 minutes. You might have less than 60 seconds to at least convey to them something about what it is you're offering or what you could do to help them in some way that has to do with whatever you're selling, your product or your service or your experience or your book or whatever it might be. So in Hollywood, to go back to let's say you're sitting across the table in one of these situations. Well, then what you have to do is it's just sort of like, okay, your 5 minutes begins, and it's like go, and then you have to say something in a very succinct, very short period of time that is going to convince them this sounds like an idea that could lead to a movie that's going to make money. Well, so somehow you have to make that presentation in such a way that they can imagine what the movie is, but you don't have the ability or the luxury, and this is a big mistake a lot of writers make, of telling the story.
Right.
And so a lot of times in these situations, and again, I'd be willing to bet it's not that dissimilar, even if you're a salesperson that's not exactly telling a story. But the thing that writers do is they say, okay, the movie, it opens here, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. Pretty soon, 4.5 minutes are used up, and they're only halfway through, and then they're rushing to finish somehow, which is why I called the book 60 Seconds, because even in a 5-minute encounter, if you can keep it to 60 seconds, that leaves time for them to ask questions. That leaves time for them to go deeper, or even, if they don't like the idea, time for them to say, what else you got?
Right. And I think that's, the comparison is very apt, I think, with business, because, again, if you have 60 seconds and somebody says, what do you do, or what can I do for you? And you start talking about your product or service and what it does, which is the equivalent of trying to tell your story, instead of having something that's sort of value-based that might resonate with them from an emotional standpoint, you've lost that time. You've just wasted that time. You've wasted their time. You've wasted your time.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it depend, though, a bit on exactly what it is you're saying about your product or your company or your service?
Well, I was saying if you get into the
story comes in.
Yeah.
Because
my point was, I was saying the equivalent of you laying out the story, chronologically, the way the movie would be, is if talking about your features of your product and service, instead of putting it in the context of a value that has something, putting it in a context that has value for the prospect.
Yeah.
That's the story.
That's exactly it. If you start going into great detail, you're lost. That's not what this encounter is about. Not if you're pitching a script, not if you're selling a product, not if you're trying to get them to hire you as a consultant. It's not about all the details. It's about the outcome in many ways. It's about a very abbreviated description of what are the steps and what is, who's in story terms, it's who's the hero of the story, what do they want, what are they up against, what are the steps they take, and what's the outcome. And I would think it's very much like that in a sale. When
Absolutely.
I coach salespeople or corporate people, I'm going over the same items. It's what they need to hear is who is someone who has used this product or service, what crisis were they facing, what goal did they have, how did this help them accomplish that goal, and where are they now having completed that journey with this product, or having worked with the person as a consultant, or having gone through the process of that they're selling in their webinar, or whatever it might be.
So what are sort of the first steps people can take, sales reps, managers, to start structuring this concise, succinct, compelling 60-second story? I mean, people sort of call it an elevator pitch, but I really don't like that terminology, because that tends to bring to mind people that are sort of just talking about their features and their specifications, not a story, right? Not as you described it, talk about an existing customer, what their problem was, how they solved it, the value they're getting, where they stand today. So how do you work with people to start developing that structure of that story?
Well, I would start by saying the last thing I would be concerned about is how long it takes to tell it. That's the last thing you want to take a look at. The first thing you want to do is compose the story, not worry about the length, because you want to be sure you hit certain key elements to that story. I mean, when I work with people on stories all stories need to be properly structured, but to give it a more simple approach or readily available approach with someone who's in the corporate arena, let's say, or someone who's trying to give a story about a case study or whatever it might be, I break it down into kind of 10 elements. And the first thing you want to ask in creating that story is who's the hero of the story. And all that means is who's the main character, who's the protagonist, if you will. A hero in a story like this is not heroic. It's someone who has the potential to become heroic in the course of the story, but it just means who's driving the action in this, who's the person who has the need or the desire we're going to talk about. Then as far as the 10 steps for that hero, the first thing is what I call the setup. It means we need to see the everyday life that this character is living before they begin this journey, before something extraordinary happens that is this story. If you're a salesperson and you're using a story to try and sell a product, then what you want is for that hero to be a satisfied, successful client or customer who's participated in whatever it is you're trying to market to the person you're telling the story to. Mm-hmm. So if, let's say we're trying to sell a weight loss program, and then the setup would be, you've picked your hero. What was their life before they started using the weight loss system that you're trying to sell? And just what have they, what did it look like? They were overweight. What was the pain of it, or what difficulty were they having? Because when you introduce this hero in this setup, you also need to create empathy with the character. And that just means you want to create a psychological connection between the listener of the story or the reader of the story. If you're doing an email campaign or something, you want to create a connection between that person and the hero of your story. And the way to create that empathy is usually with one of three things, or maybe more, maybe two or all three of these. One is create sympathy for the character because they're the victim of some undeserved misfortune. One is to put the character in jeopardy. So oftentimes it might be someone who is in big trouble. Maybe they just got word from their doctor that they, could have a heart attack if they don't lose weight.
Or they're in danger of being fired if they didn't improve their performance.
Or they're in danger of being fired.
Right.
Or their company is in great danger because now they've just gotten a new order and they don't have the equipment to do it, or the staffing to do it, or whatever they need. But there's something, they're in some kind of crisis. Some sort of crisis happens. That's going to create empathy through sympathy or jeopardy And the third one that I mentioned is likability. We care about the person because their heart's in the right place, so they're generous. But if there's a crisis that we feel sorry for them and they're in jeopardy of losing their company or losing their life or losing money or whatever it might be, now we're connected with them. And now the next thing they're going to do is they go into a period of questioning. They've got to figure out, what am I going to do about this crisis? Okay? And then in coming up with that solution, they're going to formulate a specific goal that they need to accomplish. So and if you're telling a story, the more specific that goal, the better the story is. In other words, I could tell you a story about someone who wants to be rich, but it's very hard for you as a listener to get a real clear, vivid image of that. Mm-hmm. But if I said, this is a company that had to raise $100,000 in 6 months to pay their back taxes, now $100,000 is a little easier to picture. Right. Or if I said it's about a person who needs to somehow get together $50,000 to put their daughter through college, those things are going to make it much more vivid, and that finish line is going to be clear. So whatever it is that the goal is that grows out of this crisis and that they figured out during this questioning, then they're going to have to make a commitment to doing that goal. That commitment is going to be bringing your product or your service into the situation. Mm-hmm. They're going to decide, okay, I know how I can raise this $50,000 by using this internet marketing technique. I know how I've decided I'm going to solve my company's staffing problem by going to this consultant, and they're going to help me figure out how I can streamline our operation by reducing the staff, or whatever it might be. Your company, your product is going to be the commitment they make to get to that finish line. Then it's just a matter of going through the steps they take to cross that line and the obstacles they have to overcome to do it, because you want to convey to the potential buyer some of the obstacles that this person faced, so because they're already worried they're going to face those obstacles in whatever they're dealing with that your product could solve. And if you get those out on the table, then you're giving them the emotional experience of solving those problems with the product. So you say,
and building credibility too, because if you don't bring those up, they know that you've left something out.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're hiding something, which is the opposite of what you want to do. What you want to do is lay it all out there, because you're using a story of a successful person. So you're not saying to somebody necessarily the process is easy. You're saying the process got to the finish line that they wanted to get to, and that you probably want to too. And then the last beats are the climax. That's when you actually say the person they raised the $50,000, or they were able to meet the requirements of the project they had bid on with 5 days to spare, using the streamlined staffing that the consultant helped them create, or whatever it is that's being marketed. You actually state, this is what happened when they crossed the finish line. But then the last beat, and this is very important and one that I think is often forgotten, is the story doesn't end at the climax with the finish line. The story has to include what I call the aftermath. You have to paint a picture of the new life that the character or the company or the group is living, having completed this journey. And this is where you as the storyteller need to be very sharp and clear that whatever the aftermath is that you describe for this person who's your case study, who's your success story, it matches the life that the person you're pitching to wants to be living. So if it's about a company that solved a problem, it says the aftermath might be, and now a year later, that company has increased its annual revenue by 25%. That's an aftermath. Mm-hmm. Or if it's a personal story, and now that guy who needed to lose the weight, now he is 50 pounds lighter, has kept it off, and for the first time he was able to run in the Boston Marathon. or whatever it might be. So we want to see a picture of where you want to paint a picture of where the person you're hoping to sell something to is going to be if they go on this journey with you.
Exactly. Because that's, again, the power of story. Why do we watch movies? Why do we watch TV? Because we identify with the characters, the protagonists in the story.
Right.
We want to see what happens to them.
Exactly.
And this is no different when we're doing it in business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To me, the most powerful thing about story, because it can do a lot of things, create a connection between you and the person listening to it. It's a way to sort of gift wrap data so it doesn't sound so dry and boring or make people glassy-eyed. But to me, the most important thing it does, because we have this empathy with the character, it gives the listener the actual emotional experience of having used your product or having worked with you and done that. Because if we become the hero of your story, your success story, we have experienced the success ourselves. I'm talking about on a subconscious or psychological level.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it the mental test drive. So basically, the story enables somebody to take a mental test drive. And I remember back years ago, I was reading some research about how people make decisions. And there's one study that came out that said that one of the steps that every person in the world goes through when they make a decision about purchasing something or being involved in something new, they have to make a decision. The mental test drive. They can't make the decision without doing the mental test drive. So the story really becomes critical to making that happen. Because think about somebody buying something or engaging with a prospect where they don't get that opportunity to really have what I'll call a guided mental test drive that you're doing with a story. They're sort of left to come up with it on their own because the salesperson didn't give them a story.
That's exactly right. It's like you're taking them on the mental test drive instead of saying, here are the keys, go try it. Try it out, take it wherever you want to.
Right.
And a lot of salespeople know this, at least instinctively already. I mean, it's the real estate line. Can you imagine yourself watching television in this room? Can you imagine yourself sleeping in a big bed in this nice master bedroom? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine yourself being in this situation, which is always going to be the aftermath of having done what you're trying to get them to do?
Well, I think it's hard for salespeople in a business-to-business environment. They tend to think that what they're selling is more complex and it's more logic-based. And the fact is, selling is playing on the emotions. I don't want to say playing in the wrong word, but it is drawing on the emotions of the buyers, even in a business setting. It's not logic-driven, it's emotionally driven.
I think one thing that's important to remember is just ask yourself, why does anybody spend money on anything? To me, every dollar that's since clams were money, there's only one reason money ever changes hands, and that is somebody has a problem they want solved. The problem may be my business is going under. The problem may be I don't feel rich enough. The problem may be I want to be entertained. The problem may be I need to learn more. Or the problem may be my loved one needs something. Whatever it is, they're trying to solve a problem. But why do they want to solve that problem? So they will feel better. So they'll feel happier. They'll feel safer. They'll feel more fulfilled. They'll feel more loved. And so just the whole very reason that the money is going to exchange hands, what they're really paying for is a feeling. The feeling comes with these events, the results that they're hoping for, but instinctively down deep, it's really, I need to do this so I can feel better than I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, and those feelings, depending on who you're selling to, could be, I want to feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement. I want to feel a sense of security in my job because I've done a good job by bringing you in to solve this problem. I want to feel happy because I'm going to get a promotion if this works out. I mean, it's not just, oh yeah, we got this done, right? Yeah. We solved this problem. No,
this is true. We sort of drifted off of the movie pitching, but it's very much like that, because when you pitch a screenplay in the Hollywood situation that I was describing, you're really going for, it's interesting, two different feelings. One is the person listening to this pitch is asking himself or herself, it's asking themselves, is this going to create an emotional experience for the audience? Are they going to feel better by doing this? Are we going to be able to put butts in seats to see this story? Is the story I've just been pitched, or the idea for the story I've just been pitched, does it sound emotional? So they're thinking about the feelings of others, but they also deep down are wanting to feel how they'd feel if this is a blockbuster hit, or if this is a highly rated TV show. So they're thinking about others' feelings as well as their own, but it still ultimately gets back to an emotional promise more than a statistical promise, if you will.
So a question here in the last few minutes we have is about the physical telling. So, we've talked about the structure and, establishing that quick rapport is really essential, and in business of any type, when you have a minute, let's say, to grab somebody's attention. So what do you think are the keys for quickly establishing that rapport to have the listener really open up and listen?
Well, when it comes to rapport, I think there's a step that probably needs to precede any kind of pitch or story, and that is to establish rapport. I think, to me, the two strongest ways you establish rapport with anyone is either common experience or acknowledgement. So if you want, in this hypothetical, saw somebody speak at a conference and now you have a chance to go say hello, I think you always want to begin by showing some gratitude for what you heard them say on the stage. And it's even stronger if you could say, and it really meant a lot to me because I've just been dealing with this problem and you gave me an idea of how to solve it, or it really meant a lot to me because of this. So you're saying why you're grateful and not just saying thanks for the speech. Or if it's common experience, that's why referrals are very valuable, because you could say, Patricia Fripp, who introduced the two of us, if I say, oh, Patricia says hello, if I was trying to get a job from you, let's say Patricia says hello and you owe her a lunch or something, that would remind you that we have this common experience. But then if once you've done that and you introduce yourself, or they ask the sort of obvious first question, and that is, what do you do? I think one way to very quickly get into this sort of storytelling mode is, without even it being a full story, is just to describe what you do or what your company does or what the product that you sell does in terms of who uses it and what does it do for that company. So if you said, I work for a company that's in the business of turning average people into millionaires. Now, that's not a story, but it to me, it sounds both more enticing and appealing and a bit sexier than saying I work for a financial planning company. Well, which is the same thing. But I wasn't just offering a tagline. I was thinking of this success story. Someone was a client. They had an average income. They wanted more. They worked with the company and they turned it into this much. So even in a single sentence, you're describing what you're bringing to the party in terms of a person who already used that service or used that product and was the hero of that little story and where they ended up as a result. So you're sort of saying, we create this aftermath for people, if you will. Right. If you've got a little more time, then you should have in your pocket one or two of these success stories or case studies, whatever you want to call them. So you should have right at hand, and by that, I mean not just in your pocket, I mean memorized, I mean rehearsed, I mean you're prepared whenever you run into anybody to give them a very brief story about someone who you had worked with, your company had worked with, your product had helped, and hitting those sort of 10 points to take them on that journey that person went on. And those 10 points, it took me a lot longer to describe those 10 beats than it takes to tell a story with those. You could easily tell a story with those 10 beats in 60 seconds. Yeah,
and in my last book, Amp Up Your Sales, I have a whole section on what I call these sales stories. And they're just as you described it. And it's not necessarily accidental because I based it on reading and research I'd done over time in screenwriting. And yeah, the whole point is, go through the sort of 4 or 5 questions that you laid out that you need to answer. And it's the way that those are what you use to answer the question, what do you do? Is talk about it in terms of what you do for other people and the outcomes and aftermath of it, as you described it, the outcomes they achieve. And then people get it. Because then the story suddenly starts becoming about them, the listener. Because if you open your mouth and somebody asks you what you do and you start saying, well, I'm with a company, we make this equipment and we do this, you're talking about yourself. And no one identifies with that. That doesn't create any emotions except maybe repelling people, excuse me.
Boredom,
tedium. Right? So that's not a buying emotion. So very powerful to be able to do this. And as you said, is you can't come up with them spur of the moment. These really are corporate assets. These little short stories, these vignettes, these sales stories I talk about. And so if you need to work as a team in your sales meeting to develop these, work with your marketing people, and then write them down, memorize them word for word, rehearse them repeatedly. As you mentioned, Patricia Fripp, who's a great instructor of public speaking, talks about is record them, put them on your iPhone, listen to them while you're driving, internalize it. So when the moment comes, it's like just muscle memory to tell them to customers.
Yeah, and it's not canned. If you rehearse it enough, it's what actors do. Actors get lines they have to read, and they first read them, and then they memorize them, and then they go over them and over them so that by the times they're giving a performance, it sounds natural. Because one of the things you want to make sure in any storytelling situation that we're talking about is that it's a conversation. It's not a speech. I know we're talking about it as if it's a speech, and you write it down as if it is, but you are familiar enough with it that you're not worried about hitting every single word correctly, and you're not trying to, you're not in school giving the Gettysburg Address. You're just, the way I say it is, you're doing something you've been doing your entire life. You're sitting down with someone or you're standing next to someone and you say, oh, I got to tell you what happened.
Yeah.
And you would never be worried about your ability to present a story to a friend to say, I got to tell you what happened. The only difference is with the friend, you can probably meander a bit and not worry about exactly what the point is. But here, what that person wants and what you want to offer them is just a conversation. Just, oh, let me tell you what happened. Last week we had a person that was struggling with this, and then when they came to us, they were in despair. But then we suggested they try this particular process we've developed, and we worked with them, and they were able to do this, this, and this, and in the end, they had crossed this finish line. And now, and you always end with, and now that person is, and you fill in the blank with the new life that they're able to live. That they achieved, they were rewarded with because they worked with you or your company or your product or what have you.
Excellent. Well, Michael, it's been great to talk to you. My guest has been Michael Hauge. And Michael, tell people how they can find out more about you.
The best thing is to go to my website, which will have an abundance of me talking in different ways or writing in different ways about story and different aspects of it in a lot of different contexts. The website is storymastery.com. So it's STORYMASTERY.com.
Excellent. And yeah, run out if you're in sales, you want to learn about telling stories and having quick impact. Recommend the book that you have that we talked about at the top of this, Selling Your Story in 60 Seconds, the guaranteed way to get your screenplay or play novel read, or we translate to business terms, Selling Your Story in 60 Seconds, the guaranteed way to get that next meeting, which is really what you want. And
there's also, when you go to the website, there's also a product I made with a top internet marketer called Storytelling for Marketers, and it's a webinar we did that talks about all of these concepts I've been talking about very briefly in the context of internet marketing, which has many of this, well, it has all the same situations and how you use these. And that's probably the most on-point product of the many you'll see on the website that for people in the business arena, people who are concentrate on selling or consulting and wanting to draw clients to their business. But you can surf around the whole website. You'll see my consultation services described there. And as I say, lots of articles about different aspects of story and lots of things about different movies you probably like.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, good. Well, thank you again for joining me. And
well,
remember,
thank you. It's just been a great pleasure.
Well, good. And remember, friends who are listening, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to make Accelerate a part of your daily routine. Whether you listen to it on your commute, in the gym, or make it a part of your morning sales huddle. Then you'll make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Michael Hauge, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your sales. So thanks for joining us. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.